This story is titled, My Niece Stole From Me and Listed It Online. Her parents' reaction left me speechless. So I've been building my perfume collection for years now. I started when I was a broke teenager, working my first job at a fast food place, saving up for months to buy my first real bottle. Fast forward a couple of decades, and I'm sitting on this massive collection of over 400 bottles. Yeah, it sounds a bit much, but it's my thing. Some people collect stamps or coins. Me, I'm into fragrances. There are bottles that I spent hundreds on, others that are super rare, and honestly, the collection's worth more than I'd like to admit. I'll give people a sample here and there if they're interested. I'm not stingy about it. My friends know about it, and I'm always cool with letting them try a spray or two if they're curious. But my niece, well, she took things to a different level. Now, let me explain how this went down. I thought I was doing my sister a favor by letting my 17-year-old niece, let's call her M, come over to my place to walk my dog. She'd been asking for some extra cash, and I figured why not throw her a few bucks to help me out? My dog likes her, she lives nearby, and I didn't think twice about it. She'd swing by, walk the dog, maybe hang out a bit if she wanted, and head home. Easy. But lately, I started noticing something off about my perfumes. Like a few bottles just looked different. Some had way less liquid than I remembered, and a couple of them were even missing the caps, which I found on the other side of my dresser. At first, I thought maybe I'd been using more than I realized, but after a while, the math wasn't adding up. I was seeing dents in some of my favorite bottles, ones I only wear on special occasions or hadn't even touched in weeks. My gut was telling me something wasn't right, but I figured maybe I was just being paranoid. Until one random night, I'm scrolling through Instagram. I don't know how, but I ended up stumbling across M's private account. And yep, she somehow let me see her stories without blocking me. The second I clicked on it, I was like, oh, hell no. There it was, right in my face. A bunch of little stories advertising my perfumes. Like she was holding my actual bottles in her hand, showing off these decants, little sample vials, and even listing prices for each one. My stomach dropped. She had everything on there too. Photos of my Baccarat Rouge bottle, which cost me over $300, and then Burberry Her, Daisy, Flower Bomb, you name it. All on sale in these little samples that she was selling off to her friends. This wasn't a few sprays here and there. She'd turned my collection into her personal side hustle. And of course, she thought she was being slick because she had her profile set to private. Like, yeah, okay, because nobody's ever gonna see that? The part that really got to me was how casual she was about it. She'd been doing it for weeks, based on the stories I was scrolling through, like a full-blown perfume reseller. And she was charging a solid amount too, like $20 for 5 milliliters of Baccarat Rouge. I could feel my blood boiling just thinking about how much money she'd ripped from me. It wasn't just a little oops moment. This was planned, deliberate, and honestly, disrespectful. I trusted her to be in my space, and she was treating it like her own personal department store. I stayed up that night going through each story, taking screenshots and making notes of every bottle she'd posted. I figured if I was going to confront her, I was coming with receipts. Literally. By the end, I had a list of 15 perfumes she'd taken chunks out of. I started calculating, trying to figure out exactly how much she'd cost me. Some of these perfumes aren't easy to replace, especially the rare ones that I ordered from niche sites or even overseas. There's time, effort, and money that go into a collection like this, and she just tossed that all aside for her little side gig. The next day, I checked my bottles again just to be sure, and yep, the dents were exactly where I'd suspected. I couldn't even smell my Baccarat Rouge without thinking about her grubby little hands dumping it into tiny vials to sell for lunch money, or whatever she needed cash for. She had no idea what she was doing either. I mean, there's an art to decanting perfumes properly so you don't ruin the fragrance, but she clearly didn't give a damn. She was just dumping stuff into random vials, probably spilling as much as she was saving. What pissed me off most was that she didn't even think about the fact that I'd notice. She just assumed I wouldn't care or wouldn't realize. I don't know if she thought she was being slick or if she was genuinely that clueless, but it rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, if you're gonna steal, at least be smart about it, right? But no, she just banked on me not paying attention, as if I don't take pride in what I've built. By the end of it, I'd tallied up over $500 in damages. And that's probably lowballing it because, honestly, I don't know how much she spilled or wasted while filling those vials. But between the bottles with huge dents and the full bottles she swiped, it was a decent chunk of change. I spent the next few days just sitting on the info, fuming every time I looked at my perfumes. I knew I was going to confront her, but I wanted to make sure I had everything lined up. I went through every bottle, noting down exactly how much was missing and confirming it against her Instagram posts. I had all the evidence, and I was ready to lay it out for her and my sister. Because this was beyond just a teenage mistake, let's be clear. I wouldn't have cared if she wanted a few sprays. I wouldn't have minded if she asked for a couple of samples for her friends. But stealing? Selling? I couldn't believe she'd go there, and I was ready to show her just how big of a mess she'd gotten herself into. So, after sitting on this info for a couple of days, I knew I couldn't let it slide. I gave my sister a call, asked if I could swing by for a chat. Of course, she had no idea what was coming. I drove over there, rehearsing everything I was about to say. I had my printed out list of perfumes, and I wasn't holding back. When I got there, my niece was hanging out in the living room, totally oblivious, probably scrolling through TikTok or planning her next sale. I had to bite my tongue from going off on her right then and there. My sister came in, all smiles, and we sat down at the kitchen table. I cut to the chase. I didn't waste time with any small talk, just laid my list out on the table and asked, "Do you know what this is?" She looked down, confused at first, until she saw her daughter's little perfume business in black and white. I started explaining everything I'd found, the missing perfumes, the Instagram stories, the prices M had been charging. My sister's face went from confused to horrified real fast. M walked in and froze the second she saw the look on her mom's face. My sister turned to her, and the only thing she could say was, "Please tell me this isn't true." M started stammering, making all kinds of excuses, saying stuff like, "I thought you wouldn't mind." "It's not that big a deal." "I was gonna tell you." "Yeah, sure." She was full of it, and we all knew it. I cut her off, asking her if she really thought I wouldn't notice $500 worth of perfume missing from my collection. She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, silent, looking like a deer in headlights. I went off telling her that she wasn't some innocent kid who didn't know better. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't a couple of spritzes for her friends. This was straight up theft, and if she'd pulled this on anyone else, they'd probably be calling the cops right now. My sister tried to jump in, saying, "Come on, she's just a kid." But I wasn't having it. I told her this wasn't some innocent little mistake. She broke my trust, lied to my face, and had been selling off my stuff behind my back. I laid out every single detail, making sure my sister and M knew just how much this little side gig had cost me. I could tell my sister was getting defensive, trying to soften the whole situation, but I wasn't letting her twist this into some learning moment. I told her, "Look, I don't care if she's your daughter. She's 17. She knew damn well what she was doing. She wanted to make a quick buck, and she thought I'd just let it slide." Then came the part I knew was going to be tough. I demanded they pay me back in full. I told them the total based on what she'd posted, what she took, and how much those bottles were worth. My sister's eyes practically bulged out of her head. She tried to tell me that they couldn't afford to just shell out that kind of cash, that M had been saving up for a car, and this would wipe her savings out completely. I shrugged. That wasn't my problem. I looked at M and said, "If you're old enough to be a little businesswoman, you're old enough to face the consequences when you screw people over." I could see her start to tear up, but I wasn't going to let that guilt trip me. She wasn't crying when she was stealing my stuff and selling it off, was she? At this point, my sister's tone shifted, going from defensive to straight up annoyed. She started saying that I was overreacting, that this was just perfume, and that I was ruining her daughter's future over something material. That really set me off. I told her that maybe if she'd actually disciplined her daughter, instead of letting her get away with crap like this, we wouldn't be sitting here in the first place. I told her that M could have faced way worse consequences if she'd done this to anyone else. I reminded her that I was well within my rights to go to the police, but I was giving them a chance to settle this between us. M finally spoke up, muttering something about how she thought it wasn't a big deal because I had so many perfumes and wouldn't notice. That got me. I asked her, "Do you think I bought all those perfumes just so you could come in and take them whenever you want?" She just stood there, looking down at the floor, not saying a word. I told her that she clearly didn't understand or appreciate what it meant to respect other people's things. My sister tried one last time to smooth things over, offering to pay me back in installments or figure something out, but I wasn't having it. I told her I wanted the full amount by the end of the month. I said that if they didn't pay me back, I'd go through other channels to get what I was owed. My sister started to argue, but I cut her off saying, "I'm done talking about this. You two figure it out, but I want every penny back." Before I left, I made it clear that M wasn't welcome in my house anymore. I told my sister that if she ever wanted to try and repair this mess, she'd better start by holding her daughter accountable instead of making excuses for her. Em tried to mumble an apology, but I wasn't in the mood to hear it. I told her she could apologize with her wallet. As I walked out, I could hear my sister trying to scold Em, and Em still trying to make excuses. I didn't even care anymore. All I wanted was my money back and for them to realize they couldn't just treat people like this. And if my niece learned something from it, maybe she'd think twice before pulling this kind of crap on someone else. So yeah, that was the showdown. I walked out of there feeling a bit of relief, but also kind of pissed that it even had to come to this. I thought I was just doing my niece a favor with some dog-walking cash, and here I am, out hundreds of dollars, and having to spell out basic respect to both of them. After the showdown at my sister's place, I thought the worst was over. I figured they'd take a few days to cool off, maybe realize how badly they messed up, and just pay me back. I mean, I wasn't asking for anything unreasonable. I just wanted what I was owed. But apparently that was too much to expect. What I didn't see coming was the backlash that would come from the rest of the family. Suddenly, it was like everyone had an opinion, and none of them were on my side. The day after I confronted them, I started getting calls. First was my mom, who rang me up early in the morning, going on and on about how family doesn't treat each other this way. She pulled the whole, "she's your niece and she's just a kid" routine, saying I was being way too hard on her. According to her, I was supposed to just let it go and move on, because it's just perfume. Yeah, sure, Mom. Just ignore the fact that this kid cost me hundreds of dollars. I told her straight up that if anyone wanted to foot the bill, they were welcome to chip in. But I wasn't letting it go. She didn't like that answer and went on about how I was being too harsh and acting out of anger. I asked her what she'd do if someone went into her house, stole hundreds of dollars worth of stuff, and started selling it. Would she be cool with that? She tried to dodge the question and just kept going on about family values and forgiveness. It was the same speech I'd heard growing up, every time someone in the family messed up and tried to skate by without consequences. I wasn't buying it this time. Then my aunt called, apparently after my mom had gotten to her. She was much more direct, saying she thought I was ruining my relationship with my niece over a stupid collection. I told her, "You have no idea what my collection is worth, so let's not pretend it's stupid." She tried to guilt trip me, asking if I wanted to be the reason Em couldn't get her first car. Like, somehow this whole thing was now my fault? Apparently, Em had gone crying to the family about how her mean uncle was demanding all this money, which was going to drain her car savings. She twisted the story into something like she'd just borrowed a few perfumes, and I was being a tyrant. My aunt kept bringing up how devastated Em was, how she was just trying to do something nice for her friends. I couldn't believe it. Here was my niece running a damn perfume racket, and somehow I was the villain? I kept my cool, but I told my aunt that Em could consider this an expensive lesson in respecting other people's property. My aunt just sighed and said something like, "I just hope you're happy with yourself." Yeah, well, I'd be a lot happier if people stopped acting like I'd committed some crime here. By the end of the day, I'd heard from just about every relative with a phone. Some were trying to play peacemaker, suggesting I compromise or work something out so Em wouldn't lose all her savings. Others just flat out told me I was overreacting. Not a single one of them seemed to care that Em had been stealing from me for weeks, maybe even months, and had absolutely no intention of stopping until I caught her. The way they were talking, you'd think I was the one who'd stolen from her. Then my sister called, and let me tell you, she was not happy. She came at me with this whole, "You're tearing the family apart over something so petty" spiel. I told her it wasn't petty to me. I'd worked hard for that collection, and I wasn't about to let her daughter's little business ruin it. She started yelling, saying I was destroying Em's future, that I was being selfish, and that I needed to grow up and be the bigger person. I asked her if she'd feel the same way if it were her things that Em had stolen and sold. She went quiet for a second, but then went right back to blaming me. Apparently, Em's devastated because she's had to take down her Instagram account and refund some of the sales she'd already made. Good. Maybe she'll think twice before swiping stuff that isn't hers. But my sister acted like this was some kind of tragedy, saying Em was humiliated, that she was so embarrassed now that she couldn't buy her car. I told her that if Em was embarrassed, maybe she should have thought about that before starting a damn resale business in my living room. After that call, I just felt drained. I was angry, sure, but I was more disappointed. The fact that my family could look at this situation, where I was clearly the one who'd been wronged, and still side with Em was just, I don't know, frustrating. I tried explaining to a couple of cousins that it wasn't about the money. It was about the trust. Em had totally broken any trust I had in her. And if my sister wasn't going to make her own kid take responsibility, then I was damn well going to make sure she did. Then, a few days later, my mom texted me this long message about family therapy. She said she thought it would be good for all of us to sit down and work through this. I almost laughed out loud reading it. Like, yeah, Mom, I'm going to sit in a room and have everyone tell me how wrong I am for expecting basic respect. I told her I didn't need therapy. I needed my money back. She didn't respond. As the days went on, I noticed a bit of a shift. A couple of family members started to cool off and see my side of things. My cousin, who works in retail, actually called me and said she got it because she sees people try to pull scams all the time. She said she couldn't believe Em thought she'd get away with it and told me she was on my side. But for the most part, everyone else just stopped talking to me altogether, like I was the one who'd gone rogue. It's weird when you're in the right, but you're made to feel like the outcast. So, here I am, basically the family pariah, because I dared to stand up for myself. Em and her mom still haven't paid me back, and it's looking like they're just going to keep pushing this poor Em angle, hoping I'll back down. But I'm not going to. I've made it clear to them that if I don't get my money by the end of the month, they're going to have a much bigger problem. And they can tell the whole family whatever they want about me, but I'm not letting this go. So, yeah, this is where we're at. Half the family thinks I'm some kind of monster. My sister thinks I'm out to ruin her daughter's life, and I'm just sitting here wondering how the hell they'd feel if the tables were turned. Maybe one day they'll get it, but honestly, I'm not holding my breath. Update. So a couple of weeks go by, and I haven't heard much from my sister or Em. Honestly, I thought maybe they'd finally decided to just pay me back and let this mess be done with. But no, instead, I get this text from my sister saying Em wants to apologize in person, and that it'd be good for everyone to talk things out face to face. I already had a bad feeling about it. After all the family drama, I knew this was going to be anything but a real apology. But whatever, I agreed to meet up because maybe, just maybe, they were finally going to do the right thing. We set up the meeting at a coffee shop nearby. I walked in, and there they were. My sister looking all tense, and Em sitting there with her arms crossed, looking like this was the last place she wanted to be. Right off the bat, I could tell this apology was going to be a joke. But I sat down, took a deep breath, and waited for them to start. My sister jumped in first, saying, Em has something she wants to say. Em just kind of rolled her eyes, sighed, and muttered, I'm sorry. It was so half-assed, I could barely believe it. She didn't look at me, didn't actually seem sorry at all. It was like she'd rehearsed the bare minimum of what she thought I'd accept, just so she could say she apologized and be done with it. I wasn't letting that slide, though. I told her, if you're going to apologize, at least look me in the eye and say it like you mean it. She glared at me, but she finally looked up and said, fine, I'm sorry for taking your perfume. But even then, it wasn't a real apology. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of what she'd actually done. She was just annoyed that she got caught. I asked her, do you even understand why what you did was wrong? She just shrugged and said, I guess, but it's just perfume. I thought you wouldn't care. I couldn't believe it. After all this time, she still didn't get it. I told her, it's not about the perfume, Em. It's about trust. I let you into my home. I trusted you around my things, and you decided to take advantage of that. That's the issue here. My sister cut in, trying to play mediator, saying, she's apologized, and she understands now. Can't we just move on? I wasn't having that. I told her that saying sorry isn't enough when there's no meaning behind it, especially when she's not taking any responsibility for her actions. Then, Em hit me with, well, if you didn't want people to touch your stuff, maybe you shouldn't have so much of it lying around. Oh man, that really set me off. I couldn't believe she had the audacity to act like this was somehow my fault. I told her, having a collection doesn't give you the right to steal from it. Just because I have a lot of something doesn't mean you can take it whenever you feel like it. Em rolled her eyes again, and I could see my sister getting flustered. My sister tried to calm things down, saying, let's not turn this into a bigger issue than it needs to be. Bigger issue? We were well past that. I told her, the issue got big. The second Em decided to turn my house into her personal perfume shop. At that point, Em actually laughed, which really pissed me off. It was like she thought this whole thing was a joke. I turned to my sister and said, this is exactly the problem. She doesn't care. She's not sorry she did it. She's just sorry she got caught. My sister tried to defend her, saying, she's young. She made a mistake. We all did things we regret at her age. I shot back, yeah, but I wasn't stealing hundreds of dollars from family members and trying to brush it off like it's no big deal. Then my sister switched tactics, and I could see her putting on the concerned parent act. She looked at me and said, "Honestly, you're taking this way too far. This whole thing has really affected Em. She's been so upset. She's been embarrassed in front of her friends, and now she has no savings left for her car because she's paying you back." Like, okay, am I supposed to feel sorry for her? She did this to herself. I told her, maybe this is the wake-up call she needed. My sister just sighed and said, "I think you're just holding on to this to be difficult. If family doesn't forgive family, what kind of family are we?" I told her. A real family wouldn't try to screw each other over like this. I could see that my words hit her, but she still looked like she wasn't ready to let Em take the blame. After a few minutes of awkward silence, my sister finally said, "Well, Em has refunded her friends for the samples she sold, and she's taken down her Instagram. She's done what she can to make it right." I laughed and said, "That's the bare minimum. I'm still out hundreds of dollars, and all I've gotten is a half-hearted sorry." Then, to top it off, Em had the nerve to say, "Maybe if you didn't freak out, we wouldn't even have to be here." That was it for me. I looked her dead in the eye and told her, "If you think that's how apologies work, you're going to have a rough time when you grow up." She just huffed and looked away, clearly annoyed that I wasn't letting her off the hook. My sister, seeing that I wasn't budging, finally asked, "Is there anything she can do to make this right?" I told her, "Yes, actually. She can pay me back in full, no excuses, no whining. If she wants forgiveness, she's got to earn it." I could see my sister wasn't thrilled with that, but she didn't argue. I think she realized that if she pushed me any further, I might actually consider taking this to court or doing something else they'd hate even more. We sat in silence for a bit after that, and finally, my sister sighed and said they'd find a way to get the money to me. She looked at Em and said, "You're going to have to figure this out." Em just groaned, clearly pissed that her little apology didn't get her off the hook. She stormed out of the coffee shop without another word. My sister gave me this tired look, like I was the one making her life difficult, and then said, "I hope you're happy with yourself." I told her, "I will be when I get my money back." She didn't say anything, just turned and left. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling, I don't even know, disappointed? Exhausted? I went in hoping that maybe they'd realize they were in the wrong, but instead they tried to flip it on me, like I was being the unreasonable one. I didn't want to be the villain here, but if that's how they're going to see it, then so be it. At the end of the day, I'm done bending over backward to keep everyone happy. They want to paint me as the bad guy? Fine. All I want is what I'm owed. Final update. Alright, so after that disaster of a meeting, I figured things would calm down. They'd either pay me back or ignore me, and I'd move on. But no, it's never that simple. What happened instead was a full-blown family fallout, all because I dared to hold my niece accountable for what she did. You'd think I'd threatened to burn down the family house or something with the way everyone's acting. A few days after that whole coffee shop mess, I got a call from my mom. I braced myself because I knew this wasn't going to be a friendly check-in. Sure enough, she launched into how I'd upset everyone and how this whole ordeal was causing so much stress and division in the family. She was worried about the family dynamic and started suggesting that maybe I should just drop it for the sake of keeping the peace. I just sat there, listening to her list every reason under the sun why I was responsible for this mess. When she finally paused, I told her, "Mom, I didn't cause any of this. Em did when she decided to help herself to my stuff and sell it." She tried to argue that Em's just a kid, that she didn't really understand the consequences. I laughed and said, she understood the consequences enough to hide it from me and act all innocent. But my mom wouldn't drop it. She actually tried to pull the, "well, I'll pay you back if that's what it takes" card. Like I'd suddenly forget what Em had done just because my mom offered to throw money at the problem. I told her it wasn't about the money at this point. I wanted Em to take responsibility, not dodge it because someone else bailed her out. That's what no one seemed to get. It wasn't about the cash. It was about making her face up to the fact that she messed up and couldn't just get off scot-free because family. Then my mom hit me with, "If you keep pushing this, you're going to lose people in the family. Is that really what you want?" Like, what? I was floored. They were seriously willing to cut me off because I wanted what I was owed. I told her, if family is that quick to turn their back on me over something like this, maybe they're not worth keeping around. That shut her up pretty fast, and she just hung up. A few days later, I started getting icy responses from other family members. A couple of cousins who I usually got along with stopped responding to my texts. An aunt unfriended me on Facebook. My brother, who I thought was on my side, called to say he understood my frustration, but thought I was being too harsh by making Em pay the full amount. He tried to convince me to let it go, Just this once, since M was learning her lesson and won't ever do it again. I told him to stay out of it if he wasn't willing to actually understand why I was standing my ground. Then came the family group chat drama. My sister, clearly looking for sympathy, shared a long post about how the whole situation had hurt her family, and how we all make mistakes, and sometimes forgiveness is more valuable than money. I didn't even bother replying. It was clear they were circling the wagons around M, painting her as some innocent kid who'd been unfairly punished by her greedy uncle. Meanwhile, I was just sitting there, wondering when basic respect for other people's stuff went out the window. After about a week of this, I found out that my sister and M had actually reached out to a few other family members to borrow money to pay me back. They were so set on not having M take full responsibility that they were willing to ask for handouts rather than let her use her own savings. And of course, they framed it as, "We need help with this huge financial burden." It was so ridiculous. And you know what? They managed to get the money together. My sister finally sent me a bank transfer, covering the amount I'd calculated that M owed. She didn't include a note, not even a "here's the money," just the amount and nothing else. But honestly, it felt hollow. Sure, I got my money back, but it didn't feel like the win I thought it'd be. A few days later, I ran into my aunt at the store. She gave me this look, like I'd personally offended her by daring to stand up for myself. She pulled me aside and said something like, "You know, there are better ways to teach someone a lesson than by making them miserable." I just looked at her and said, "Maybe the lesson here is that M shouldn't have taken something that wasn't hers." She rolled her eyes and walked off, muttering something about family loyalty. It's insane how they've all decided I'm the one with the problem here. What really gets me, though, is that my sister and M have made zero effort to apologize since they paid me back. No follow-up, no, "Hey, we're sorry for all the trouble." Just radio silence. It's like they resent me for making them deal with the consequences of M's actions, and now they're holding a grudge. The whole family's split now. Half of them still aren't talking to me, and the other half only reach out when they need something. A couple of weeks later, my cousin, one of the few who actually sees my side, texted me saying that M was apparently still complaining about the whole thing. She'd been telling her friends that I was the mean uncle who destroyed her life over some stupid perfume. She'd even posted a bunch of vague stories on her Instagram about toxic family and people who only care about money. Honestly, I couldn't care less what her friends think, but it stung knowing she'd learned absolutely nothing from all this. She still thinks she's the victim here. Looking back, I don't regret making them pay me back. I stood my ground, and I'm glad I didn't just let it go because of family loyalty or whatever. But I'd be lying if I said this hasn't left a sour taste in my mouth. It's not even about the money anymore. It's about realizing that my family would rather sweep things under the rug than hold someone accountable when they're clearly in the wrong. I didn't expect a parade or anything, but some respect would have been nice. Instead, I'm the villain, the guy who doesn't care about family, all because I wanted to be treated with basic decency. If anything, this whole experience has shown me who I can actually count on, and it's a much shorter list than I thought. So yeah, that's the fallout. My family's fractured, M's still playing the victim, and I'm left wondering if I was ever truly part of this family to begin with. But hey, at least I've got my collection safe and sound, and from now on, I'll be a hell of a lot more careful about who I trust around my stuff. If they think that makes me the bad guy, then I guess that's just who I am now.